Read Smart, the Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction podcast. This podcast is generously supported by the Blavatnik Family Foundation.
Hello, I'm Razia Iqbal. Thank you for joining us today for this Shortlist episode of the Read Smart podcast. Now, if you haven't already heard, Caroline Sanderson, chair of the 2022 Baillie Gifford Prize judges, announced the shortlist at a live event on stage at the Cheltenham Literature Festival. Here's the moment the list was announced.
I'm delighted to announce that the 2022 Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction shortlist is Legacy of Violence, A History of the British Empire by Caroline Elkins. The Escape Artist, The Man Who Broke Out of Auschwitz to Warn the World by Jonathan Friedland. My Fourth Time We Drowned, Seeking Refuge on the World's Deadliest Migration Route by Sally Hayden. The Restless Republic, Britain Without a Crown by Anna Kay. A Fortunate Woman, A Country Doctor's Story by Polly Morland. And Super Infinite, The Transformations of John Donne by Catherine Rundell. Yeah.
And joining me here today in our virtual studio up in the cloud, I'm joined by two of this year's judges, Rachel Cooke and Georgina Godwin. Rachel is a writer and columnist for The Observer and television critic for The New Statesman, as well as author of her brilliant career, 10 Extraordinary Women of the 50s. And Georgina is a broadcast journalist who presents the interview programme Meet the Writers, well worth listening to, and the current affairs show The Globalist on Monocle 24. She's also books editor for the station and chairs many literary events worldwide. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being with us.
Hello.
Thank you.
So let's start by just talking about this experience. I've been a judge on the Baillie Gifford Prize, and it is both deeply enriching, but a really difficult job to go from the long list to the short list. I was talking to three of the judges in the last podcast about whittling everything down to the long list. So let's start with you, Rachel. How hard has that been from the long list to the short list?
Well, actually, I found this part slightly easier than the long list. All the books that I wanted to be on the short list ended up on it. So I feel quite sort of happy and smug generally. I mean, it is difficult. I mean, the whole process is difficult because you're reading very good books and you're also, and I think this is the harder part, you're reading books that are very different from one another. And there's an occasional feeling of you're having to weigh up apples and pears. And that is very challenging. And you have to put out of your mind all the hum of an author's reputation, the way a book has been reviewed, received, the idea of whether they're writing about an important subject, even the length of the book, you have to sort of ignore that. And you somehow have to get to the essence of the book and why you feel that it moves your reading soul, I suppose. And that is hard. But I actually did very much enjoy the shortlist meeting because it was all going my way.
So you were happy and smug. Georgina, this idea of comparing apples with pears is it's a perennial problem with the Baillie Gifford. Well, not problem, but it's a challenge, right? Because there are books every year that are enormous. They feel really important. And then there are books that are beautiful but smaller in terms of, I don't mean their length, but just the particularities that they might be dealing with.
Absolutely. And as Rachel says, this was an issue, and you do have to just not let that cloud your judgment in any way. And you are just, I mean, in the end, it's down to the power and the beauty of the writing, because it can be a very small subject, but if it's rendered in such a way that it moves your soul, then of course that doesn't matter at all. And I think, I mean, for the shortlist meeting, I think Rachel and I were pretty much aligned on what we liked, which was wonderful. And like Rachel, I am feeling a little bit smug because the books I really love are on there. And there was a really useful question that somebody asked us. They said, if you had to recommend this book to a friend, what would you say? And even more than that, which book can you not wait to press into the hands of readers? And that was the thing I think that really clarified my thinking when we were sort of weighing up between a couple that might have made it. It was like, well, if I was recommending this to somebody I really cared about, which one would I want them to read and why? And that had a great way of kind of focusing the mind.
I do think that that's a really significant question to ask, because in any given year, we know hundreds of thousands of books are published. And in the non-fiction field in particular, they range, of course, from, extraordinary new biographies of subjects that we know quite a lot about, but also of people that perhaps the general public have never heard of. So I suppose it is that thing, how excited are you to press this book into the hands of of an individual? But and this is the really big but, Rachel, I suppose, because your next step, of course, is to choose the winner, and you have to choose a shortlist of which any one of those six books could win, and that's tough, right?
Yeah, there's no point putting a book on the shortlist that you don't feel could win the prize. And I mean, in terms of, I feel all the books could win the prize. Obviously, I do have my darlings already. And there's certainly one book on this list that I have bought, I think, 3 times now as a present for someone else. So I think that's quite a good sign. I feel it's not only just feeling proud about the list, it's that evangelical sense of, you absolutely must read this, I've bought it for you, it's going to change the way you think about X or Y. um, I mean, they are 6 really excellent books, I think. A large part of my life is spent reading for a living. I review a lot of books, and I feel that I have quite a good sense of the landscape. And I think these are really, really 6 very, very good and important books. They contribute to debates that we're having, and they are potentially mind bending.
Georgina, I mean, when you hear Rachel talking about a particular book that she has bought for friends, I mean that suggests that there will be some pretty lively discussion taking place in terms of defending particular books. Presumably, that's already happened, and you kind of all know where your colours have been pinned to which mast. But it is also about both persuading people and being willing to be persuaded, isn't it?
And that's such an important point. I mean, there was a book on the long list that I really, really loved that didn't get through. But in the end, I think that people can be very persuasive, and you have to be open to that. You have to be able to see their point and see why perhaps it wouldn't work as well as others. I think the winner meeting, the meeting to decide who ultimately gets the prize, is going to be very difficult because, as Rachel said, I think we've all got a secret favorite, one or two, and they are books that we are very passionate about. And I think that's so important, that we do feel so strongly about these books. I mean, there's talk of wanting to press it into someone's hand, or in Rachel's case, buying it 3 times already for somebody. And I think that meeting, we've all been terribly polite to each other. There have been no out and out rows. I'm not sure that's going to be the case for the winner meeting.
I mean, I wonder. I'm just remembering my own experience of judging this prize, and it's interesting to hear that everyone's being polite, because I wouldn't regard the meetings that we had ever as being tense. But there was some pretty robust defending of particular books, and arguing against judges who were willing to say, this is the one I want to win, and I'm not going to change my mind about this. Rachel, how would you describe the kind of atmosphere so far behind the scenes?
Well, I have judged other prizes in the past, and sometimes it did get quite bloody. I'm not going to lie about that. This has been much more friendly, although I will say that Clive Murray, who's one of our judges, who's not able to be with us today, he got slightly duffed up when we chose the shortlist. It was a bit unfortunate for him because he was in the meeting via Zoom, so there may have been a feeling of us ganging up on him. I don't know. I mean, I think Georgina's right. You have to listen to other people's point of view. I find it quite hard to be equivocal about books. I tend to feel very strongly about them. I've always been like that, really, from being a child. And I do have to bite my lip sometimes when I think someone's talking bunkum about a book. But yeah, so far it's been very friendly. We'll see. I don't know, but maybe bring boxing gloves to the next meeting.
I love the idea of Clive. We should just tell you what the situation was, because he was joining by Zoom because he couldn't be there. But before you feel sorry for him, he was joining from a Venetian palazzo. And he did turn the camera around to show us this absolutely exquisite room. And while we were waiting for people, went into some depth about the kind of Renaissance decorations and how it was all set up. What a lovely time he was having. So I'm not crying for Clive.
I mean, he wasn't broadcasting from a basement in Kyiv. I don't think anyone should be misled.
No, he was just on holiday and rocking up. Oh, that's very amusing. I wonder where he'll be for the final judging meeting. I mean, I do think that this is a. I mean, I don't know, Rachel, you were talking about having judged other book prizes. I mean, I have two, both fiction and non-fiction, and this one's unique, it seems to me, because it does force you to think about why a book is important, because in the end I think the judgment that you'll make with the winner is to do with this being, in the judgment of these judges, the most important book in non-fiction this year.
Yes, and I think it is challenging, particularly because it takes you outside your kind of comfort zone. You're reading about subjects that you may know nothing about. One of the books on our long list was about Chinese characters. And, that for me was a, completely alien subject. I'd never read anything about it before. I'd never read anything like this book. So you have to be very attentive to the fact that is it possible to make anything interesting? I believe that it is, and that's a sign of good writing. So you have this wonderful feeling of going into all these new worlds. You're sort of forced to read books that you would never normally choose, and that for me has been a really, really good thing, because normally I choose the books I review, and obviously if you're judging a fiction prize, that's you're not being challenged in that particular way. I think that's what's amazing about the Baillie Gifford, is that it brings whole areas to readers. I remember when Barbara Demnick won some years ago with her book about North Korea.
Yeah,
And
Nothing to Envy.
yes, and
Incredible book.
an incredible book. And I had never read anything about North Korea, and I went out and bought that book because I'd heard it had won the prize and I'd read good things about it. And it was just it was an incredible reading experience, because it took me to somewhere I'd never ever thought about before, I'm ashamed to say. So I think that this prize is special in that way.
And I suppose in a way you're also highlighting the importance of book prizes, because if you had never heard of either that writer or thought about reading a book about North Korea, her winning what was, of course, the Samuel Johnson Prize, meant that you went and read it. And I think also, Georgina, one of the things that is so striking about reading for a non-fiction prize is how mind expanding it is.
Oh, completely. And I mean, there were some books that didn't even make the long list, and you're aware that within, a few chapters that they're not going to, but they were so interesting. You just needed to carry on reading. I had no idea, for instance, that marine insurance was so fascinating. And there was just I mean, so mind expanding, and just another sort of feature of it, and I think something we have to be slightly wary of, uh, but I think it's important, is when you look at last year's winner, Empire of Pain, about the Sacklers and the whole health
Patrick Radden
crisis.
Keefe's extraordinary book.
Exactly. Really extraordinary book. But what that book did was, I think it changed policy and it changed minds. It had an absolute impact on the real world. And I would love whoever we choose to have as much of an impact, but I think that can't be our baseline, because good writing will be good writing, whether it changes the world or not. But I think that is a wonderful kind of spin off, particularly when you look at Patrick's book.
And so, of the 6 books on the list this year, 5 are written by women. Rachel, complete coincidence? Was there an argument made for? Um,
No. We only noticed actually when we arranged the 6 books on the table. And then I think it was me, I said, oh, look, we've only got one bloke. I mean, I don't believe that you should ever choose a prize based on anything other than the quality of the work. However, I will say that in the past, quite a lot of men have won this prize, and non-fiction, certainly in people's minds, has been dominated by men. So for me, this is incredibly cheering, and even more cheering than that, these women are on areas which stereotypically might be considered male areas. One of the books, the author has been into, she's traveled around the world as a reporter, going to some quite dangerous places. So I think it's fantastic that 5 of them are women, and I'm thrilled about it. But it was totally accidental.
Georgina, I mean, you read an awful lot, like Rachel too, for your job. I wonder whether you think that what we're seeing is perhaps representative of a wider shift in the publishing world over the last decade or so, that women are just becoming more confident in writing in areas that have been dominated by male writers.
I mean, I think what we're seeing is a shift possibly in the publishing industry in terms of who the big publishers are hiring and who are making those decisions. Because before, I mean, one mustn't pretend that it wasn't the case, that it was largely white middle class men who made those decisions. And that has been changing very much over the last few years, where you're seeing a lot of new blood coming into publishing, a lot of new ideas, people who are happy to take a chance, and to kind of open those doors a little bit more. It's much more diverse in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of class, and I think that there has definitely been a kind of broadening of where those books come from. That being said, though, you can only judge the books from the ones that are submitted, and the ones that are submitted, of course, are controlled by the publishers. I was sad that we didn't have a greater spread of different races within that, but those submissions simply weren't there.
So, just a final question. Just reflect for me, if you would, both of you, on how you're feeling about having to get your heads into these 6 books again. Rachel.
Well, it's an interesting experience because we're going in the next few weeks. We will reread these books, and I think that's a real test for a book. Does it bear rereading, particularly quite soon after the first time you've read it? And I think that does sort the wheat from the chaff. What will I notice? What new things will I notice about a book? Will I feel more compelled by it or less compelled by it? So I'm looking forward to it, and I am looking forward to the final meeting, because it will be interesting to see how that experience has affected the other judges.
Georgina, the exercise of rereading is an interesting one, isn't it? Because really not that many people reread books.
It is very, very interesting. And it's something I have to say I'm really looking forward to, because each of those books moved me profoundly in some way or another. I'm a little bit frightened in a way, because some of them really did have a huge effect on me, and to know that one's emotions are going to be wrung out all over again is quite daunting. But I mean, 4 out of the 6 I've already read twice, and so going back for a third time, I mean, Rachel's absolutely right. You notice different things every time, and I think certainly by the time of the third reading, it's the quality of the writing. You know what happens, you know all the facts, you know all the shocking things, and hopefully perhaps you're a little bit emotionally inured to how you're going to feel. But the quality of the writing will sing out, particularly I think on rereading. And I honestly can't wait. Any one of these books is a hugely worthy winner, and the prospect of sitting down for a couple of days cuddled up with a fabulous book is just something to be absolutely cherished.
And in the end, that's what these book prizes are all about, isn't it? That you can convey the enthusiasms of 6 judges to the rest of the country and indeed the world. I really do love the Baillie Gifford Prize, and I'm so grateful to you, Rachel and Georgina, for spending some time talking about this process and what it's been like for you. Thank you both. And congratulations on narrowing this long list down to these 6 amazing books. Now, if you're interested in learning more about the books on this year's shortlist, then do join the Baillie Gifford Prize's director, Toby Mundy, who will be back here over the next few weeks. And Toby is going to be talking to each of the shortlisted authors, lucky him, about their work and what it's like to make the shortlist. And you can also join in the conversation if you want on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok at BG Prize, where we will be sharing trailers for each of the shortlist, including readings by the authors and appearances from some familiar faces explaining why they love these books. Now, the winner announcement is going to take place on the 17th of November at the Science Museum in London and will be available to watch via live stream on Facebook and YouTube. And you can catch the winner at the Cambridge Literary Festival on Sunday, November the 20th, just 3 days after the announcement. For more information and to book your ticket, visit the Cambridge Literary Festival's website. Thank you once again to the Blavatnik Family Foundation for its continued generous support of this podcast and the winner ceremony. And thank you for listening. Congratulations to all the shortlisted authors. I can't wait to find out more about these 6 extraordinary non-fiction books. Till the next time, bye-bye.
Read Smart, the Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction podcast. This podcast is generously supported by the Blavatnik Family Foundation.